Throughout 2011, the Arab Spring saw the spontaneous rise of a number of protest movements across the Arab world. It was unprecedented in multiple ways, but the role social media played in shaping aspects of the occurrence in particular cannot be understated. Newly launched American social media networks, such as Facebook and Twitter, were utilized as tools to organize, coordinate, and support the overthrow of entire governments. This ultimately culminated in the American military intervention in Libya to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. I think this context is necessary in understanding the nature of another ostensible outcome of the Arab Spring, the Syrian civil war. The conflict was, and still is, essentially one between the established regime of Bashar al-Assad and rebel forces backed by foreign powers. News media reporting of the situation tends to be heavily skewed by ideological biases and geopolitical interests. In the first few years of the war, with public opinion in the West still impacted by the aftermath of 9/11, as well as the rise of the Islamic State, Australian media outlets often use the conflict as a pretext to focus on the perceived security risk of Islam. Western nations, led by the US Obama administration and Britain's Cameron government, sought a mandate to intervene militarily in Syria, as they'd done in Libya. A chemical weapons attack in Ghouta, Damascus in August of 2013 was potentially useful in this regard. A United Nations report on the event was picked up as evidence that the Assad regime had carried out the attack, in spite of the report not assigning blame to any particular party. The 2016 paper, Humanitarian Intervention, A Predictable Narrative, found that AP introduced the largest number of themes in relation to the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government in the Ghouta attack, emerging 49 different times in the 89 reports examined, followed closely by Obama considering strike options and dead civilian victims of the attack. And it went on to suggest that military intervention is justified through these narrative themes.
Indeed, I'd ask every member of Congress, and those of you watching at home tonight, to view those videos of the attack. And then ask, what kind of world will we live in if the United States of America sees a dictator brazenly violate international law with poison gas, and we choose to look the other way?
These are issues with traditional broadcast media. However, as I implied, social media and what's come to be known as citizen journalism seem just as relevant in the Syrian context. Another paper, Social Media and Revolution, which was written at the end of 2011, finds of the Arab Spring that news was co-created by bloggers and activists alongside journalists, and suggests that Twitter recreates journalism as a conversation rather than the expert telling of a story. This has mixed consequences, of course. Throughout the 2010s, information about Russian propaganda being disseminated through targeting of social media algorithms became well known, and such methods aren't necessarily confined to Russia. In 2016, stories relating to the last hospital in Aleppo theme became prevalent across social media, and as you can see here, there's even a blog post by Atlantic Council's DFR lab about it. Major examples include this tweet from the 27th of July announcing the last hospital in Aleppo had been destroyed, and this tweet the following day which made a similar claim about the last pediatric hospital. Bombings in eastern Aleppo in November of 2016 led to a number of media articles about the destruction of the last hospital in eastern Aleppo. However, by this time, many were skeptical of the claim. In the face of this kind of increased scrutiny, those who work in traditional media tend to seek to contain the spread of misinformation and unverifiable claims, specifically to place regulations and restrictions on the use of social media and of the internet in some kind of effort to stamp out fake news. To me, this seems like fighting a losing battle. I think ultimately it isn't necessarily a bad thing that new forms of information sharing make people more skeptical of what they hear and more likely to challenge media orthodoxy.